What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So, I want to continue with my list of best shooting guards, top 10 shooting guards. So, at number 10 the other day, I had Ray Allen, and number 9, I have Sam Jones. Sam Jones has fallen over the past 20 to 25 years, and the current, eyes of sports fans. Either they don't know who he is, or they just dismiss that whole generation as guys and scrubs and can't play today, which I think is very disrespectful. But a lot of young people today are disrespectful. You know what I'm saying? But they won't respect themselves or whatever. You know. Um, at the end of the day, though, I chalk it up to two different things: the passage of time. The people that watch the Celtics play are either dead, or retired and no longer active in media, and also a little bit of racism. By that I mean Boston racism. Boston has a habit of venerating certain stars and underrating others. I mean, like, Larry Bird to me is the greatest Celtic, but Larry Bird, man, he gets talked about all day. Um, Tom Heinsohn, who just recently passed away, he got talked about to an extent. Bob Cousy, Bob Cousy and Bill Sharman, you know, they got talked about. Bob Cousy was the first star of the Boston Celtics before Bill Russell arrived. Uh, going with the baseball, Ted Williams, um, Carl Yastrzemski, shit, Johnny Damon, um, got a little bit of juice when he was on those uh, Red Sox teams in the 2000s. But the Jim Rices, you know, you always talked about what he couldn't do. Yeah, he could hit, but he's slow and not a great defensive player. On base percentage is not that great. But the weaknesses of other people, it's blasphemy. Bring that up. Well, this is the thing. Um, Sam Jones, arguably, arguably, was the best player on those Bill Russell's teams, Celtics teams during the entirety of that run. Now, technically, I think Havlicek was better overall than Sam Jones, but at the beginning, Havlicek wasn't on that squad, and then he was a six man. Sam Jones came to the NBA just a year after Bill Russell. In fact, he's the only player other than Bill Russell and Casey Jones to be on those teams that won 8 consecutive titles between 1958, 59, and 50, excuse me, 65, 66. Those 8 consecutive years. Those were the only three guys to be on those teams all 8 years. And they eight-peat. I mean, it's still impressive. You know what I'm saying? I know that it wasn't many teams, but still to win 8 championships in a row is still kind of impressive. Very impressive. Um, Sam Jones. Before I go further, I want to read his accomplishments. Okay, so Sam Jones was drafted in the first round. He was the eighth overall pick of the 1957 NBA draft. He went to college at North Carolina Central. Okay. Um, he went to high school at a place called Laurinburg Institute, which is in Laurinburg, North Carolina. 6'4", 198 pounds. And he played from 1957 to 1969, wore number 24, which is, of course, retired by the Boston Celtics. He was a 10-time NBA champion. Second most championships ever for an NBA player. Five-time NBA All-Star. Three-time All-NBA second team. He was on the 25th anniversary and the 50th anniversary NBA teams. For his career, he averaged 17.7 points per game, to go along with 4.9 rebounds and 2.5 assists per game. And to me, he was the best. He was the second best shooting guard and the third best overall guard in the 1960s. He was the second best shooting guard behind Jerry West. And I believe he was the third best overall guard behind uh, point guard Oscar Robertson and shooting guard Jerry West. Even though I know Jerry West is listed as a point guard, but in all honesty, Jerry West to me was more of a combo guard. You know what I'm saying? He played technically the point guard position, but he was their primary scorer. And it's kind of like when Goodrich and West were there in the backcourt, they kind of both had point guard duties. And because Jerry West was their primary scorer, especially as Baylor broke down, I tend to consider him a shooting guard. Some people differ. They call him a point guard, but it's just me, I consider him a shooting guard. When I was growing up, Jerry West was always considered a shooting guard. So, um, you know, even though they kind of didn't distinguish that as much when he played. But anyway, nevertheless, Sam Jones was not only one of the best guards, but he was arguably the best clutch player in the NBA, and that includes Jerry West. Um, there was an interview I saw some years ago where Bill Russell said that I think he said something to the effect of there was 10 times that he could think of in his career, 10 times where Boston needed a shot to either tie or win critical games, and he said Sam Jones was 10 for 10 in all those instances, including Game 4 of the 1969 NBA Finals between Boston and the Lakers. Whereas in that series, if I'm not mistaken, had the Lakers won that game, there would have been a 3-1. Sam Jones hit a big shot late in that game to, I think, to tie the series at two. I think the Lakers went up. I think the Lakers were up 2-1 going into that game, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but yeah, Sam Jones was their clutch performer, and he elevated his game during the playoffs. It was during the playoffs when Sam Jones elevated his game. During the 1965 playoffs, Sam Jones averaged almost 29 points a game. I remember they were in a system. It wasn't like one guy was just shooting the ball all the time. You know, they were a team. But for him to average that many points goes to show you how valuable he was offensively. And though Bill Sharman was probably their best pure shooter, Bill Sharman played more in the 1950s. Okay, he's part of the earlier, you know, crop of Boston Celtics. Okay, Sam Jones was their best scorer. You know, not only could he hit from outside, if they had a 3-point line, he would score even more points. But he could hit from outside what would today be a 3-point territory. But he had a mid-range game. He could score in the paint. He could take you off the dribble. He could create his own shot. He was very quick. He could drive and finish. You know what I'm saying? He could score over defenses. He could catch and shoot. His signature was the bank shot or shooting off glass. Something that you really don't see anymore. And the last guy I could think of that really did that on purpose was Tim Duncan. Um, but yeah, Sam Jones was known for shooting off glass. And, you know, it just goes to show you that time is a motherfucker. You know what I'm saying? Sam Jones had to work really hard to get to the NBA and to get to that position he was in. He only averaged, I think he averaged less than 5 points per game his rookie year. And it took him about 3 to 4 years to finally get into the starting rotation because he was playing behind the legendary Bill Sharman and those guys. Okay. But Sam Jones was pretty much an upgrade from Bill Sharman. He was bigger, stronger, faster. Um, shot a higher percentage because he had a more variant offensive repertoire. And, he was critical for those teams. If it wasn't for Sam Jones, Boston would have won fewer titles, and Chamberlain's standing would be a lot better. Um, Lots better. I mean, some people still have him as the GOAT or top five or whatever, but Sam Jones might have been more of a thorn in Wilt's side than Bill Russell was. Um, but at the end of the day, Sam Jones just is not appreciated in the manner that he should be. He's not, and it's an absolute tragedy, man. It just goes to show you, like I said before, the problem with Boston. He led the Boston Celtics in scoring in the 1962-63 season, averaging 19.7 points per game. And during that 1964-65 season, when he led them in playoffs with almost 29 points a game during the regular season, he averaged 25.9 points per game. During the 1965-66 season, he averaged 23.5 points per game. In fact, from 4 seasons in a row, 1964-65 to 67-68, he averaged 20 or more points per game each season. Sam Jones, when he retired in 1969, pretty much retired to a private life. He coached for a couple of years, for about 4 years at Federal City College. And then he coached at North Carolina Central University for another year or two. And he was an assistant with the New Orleans Jazz for one season, 1974-75. But now he leads a private life, teaching and tutoring, um, for many years. I think he's semi-retired, or he's either retired totally. He's 87 years old. So at that point, when you got a guy that's getting up there like that, it really bothers me that he's not being talked about. I've always said that that generation of players, we're slowly starting to lose them. You know what I'm saying? For a long time, we were lucky to have these guys around for a very long time. For most part, yeah, we did lose Wilt kind of young and Pete Maravich and some others, but for the most part, the NBA have been very lucky until about 10 years ago to keep these guys around. But starting with maybe Paul Arizon's passing in 2006 and onward, we're starting to lose these guys. So, um, at the end of the day, these guys should be remembered for what they accomplished in their careers and for setting the foundation to what we see now, the evolution of basketball. It started with these guys. Um, Guys getting bigger and stronger, more skilled, uh, faster, being able to do more out there, showcasing skills that we hadn't seen prior to them. Um, Sam Jones did what he did, and then Sam Jones made it possible for the Julius Ervises. Julius Erving made it possible for the Michael Jordan, and then Kobe, and LeBron, and all these guys. And then LeBron and these guys, they're going to make it possible for another generation of guys who may have an even higher skill set than what we're seeing now. So um, that's pretty much it. Tell what you guys think.